Hey everybody, welcome back to Moving Matt. We do vlogs, travel, and some camera stuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the Canon C70 versus the Canon Eos R5. And I know this isn't a direct comparison because I know one is a cinema camera and one is a stills camera that also does video. But I do think they're in a similar enough price range and also a form factor that maybe some of you, like myself, is thinking about maybe picking between the two. So first I'll go through some of the pros and cons of each. Then I'll talk about some of the unknowns like firmware that may change our opinions one way or the other. And I hope in this video you can get a better idea of which one's for you, and then I'll let you know which way I'm leaning. So the C70, the first pro I will give it is its dynamic range. It's said to have close to 16 stops, or at least that's what Canon is marketing it as. Usually it comes somewhere underneath there, but it's all due to its dual gain sensor, which allows you to keep the most out of the shadows and out of the highlights. It is actually the same sensor that is in the C300, which is $11,000 cinema camera. So that's pretty incredible to be getting that in a $5,500 body. One of the pros I'll give to the C70 is it's probably definitely not gonna overheat. So it has a fan inside and it's a cinema camera. It's made for video, and I do not see it overheating in any of its different modes. Now I'll go into it more on the R5's cons, but that's been a big issue for the R5. Another big pro is that it has internal ND filters. I know for a lot of people, including myself, that ND filters are pretty much a hassle. A lot of times I am in a run and gun scenario and I don't necessarily have the time to just pull off an ND filter and put on another one while I'm trying to capture video. So having an internal ND filter is definitely going to save a lot of time and convenience. The other huge benefit over the R5 is all the extra cinema features you'll get. You get C-Log 1, 2, and 3, you get HLG, you get the different scopes. There's just so many different added little bonuses such as connectors and other little things that you're not going to get out of the R5 that you're going to get in a cinema camera. Another big benefit that it has for those who are doing social media or maybe even doing social media for their clients is that it allows you to record in vertical video. And that's something that is becoming more and more important, even if you don't like it very much. The final big pro that I'll give to the C70 is that it allows you to shoot redundant video to its SD cards. For anybody who shoots wedding or really any commercial work, that is just a huge pro in the C70 direction. So now that I've listed off a few of the pros of the C70, let me go through some of the cons of the C70. The first big con I'll give to the C70 is it does not allow RAW video, which is kind of a big deal for a cinema camera. And I know that maybe I wouldn't use it that much, and 10-bit is really great for most people, and I'm sure it's going to be beautiful footage. But having the option to shoot that RAW is definitely a big benefit that the C70 really needs. And I hope that they'll update that later in the future and they won't let that segment them from the C300, which is kind of what it looks like right now. The other big con is that it's a Super 35 sensor. And I know that that's not exactly a con for a cinema camera, that's kind of the standard and the norm. Where it does become a con is if you're using the RF lenses, which it has an RF mount, then that RF lens is not going to be able to be properly utilized on a Super 35 sensor. So for example, my 15 to 35 would now be starting out at 22.5, and that's without using the digital stabilization, which brings me to the next big con is it does not have in-body image stabilization. So I do like the digital stabilization of my Canon R, but I do think that they could have added in-body image stabilization as well, especially if it's going to be a smaller sensor. So moving on to the next big con, and this may be the biggest con for me, and that's that they do not have the new autofocusing system. And I know they said that it's an updated autofocusing system, but it's definitely not the same one that's in the R5 and R6. It does not have eye tracking, and this may be something that they can update in the future in a firmware, but I just do not want to rely on updated firmwares in the future. Sometimes they come through, sometimes they do not. And it looks like this has the same autofocus that is in the C300, which I'm sure is good enough, but I don't really want just good enough if I'm paying that much for a camera. The other big con, and I know this isn't exactly a con because it's a cinema camera, but it's not a hybrid at all. Just wish it was a little bit more like the Sony a7S III, where it's a video-centric camera first, but it also has some of the same photo capabilities that you can use if you need to. So moving over to the R5, and I'm not going to spend too much time here because a lot of us already know a lot about the Canon R5, but to run over some of the pros that I do see over the C70 is, for one, it does shoot RAW, and that's kind of a big deal that I would like to have in a camera, especially if I'm spending so much money. And the fact that the R5 can do it and the C70 can't do it is kind of odd. The next big feature is that it also has 8K and also downsampled 4K from that 8K. And that's pretty incredible, and it's definitely gonna add some detail to your footage. The other big thing is that it is a full frame sensor. I do think there's just such benefit to having RF glass that is a full frame glass being put on a full frame sensor. You don't have to worry about any of that hassle of maybe adapters or maybe it just not working properly. If you're gonna have an RF mount, then have a full frame sensor to go along with it. The other big thing is having that better autofocus, having that eye autofocus, and as well as, you know, the animal autofocus. That's incredible, and that's a great feature to have. And me, as somebody who's not gonna be manually focusing and gonna be having it on the go more, I would definitely say that the autofocus in the R5 is a big plus. The other big thing is that the R5 is a hybrid camera, and maybe you don't get all those cinema benefits of like all the different connectors and all the different modes, but you do have a whole separate beast when it comes to taking stills. And it's great, the idea of not having two cameras, especially if you're just a one-man operation. So quickly to some of the big cons of the R5, well, of course, is the overheating. That's been terrible for a lot of different people, and I know there's a lot of workarounds. If you cut it off and cut it back on, and I think it's getting better with the firmware update that happened, but still, that's just something that I don't want to be worried about, and I think a lot of people don't want to be worried about, that their camera is going to overheat and it's going to cut you off from a lot of the beautiful modes that you've actually bought this camera for. The other big thing is that the file sizes are extremely huge, and I hear that the codecs is extremely hard to edit on pretty much any computer that's out right now. And that's a big downer. And the fact that you can get a lot of different types of formats on the C70 is a really big pro in its direction and a huge con in the R5's direction. The other big con is that the R5 is not gonna have that dynamic range, and it's not gonna have the same low light as the C70. And I think that that is a big deal, especially if you want some really professional looking footage, because dynamic range means even more than resolution in a lot of cases. And I think not having that dynamic range in the R5 is definitely a downer and a con on the R5. So now that I've laid out the pros and cons of each, I'll kind of give you some of the unknown factors and hopefully help you make a better decision for yourself. So one of the big unknowns is firmware updates. So maybe firmware will come to the C70 that will allow it to shoot RAW, which would kind of negate the RAW being in the R5 and not being in the C70. Another big firmware that could be put into the C70 is better autofocus, and maybe they can do some of the eye autofocus out of the C70. That would be great, and that would go a long way. And on the R5 side, there could be getting a firmware update with C-Log 3, which is pretty much known at this point that it's going to be coming somewhere down the line. And if that's the case, then that may shrink the dynamic range argument just a little bit. It's not going to do the same thing as the C70, but it definitely could make a pretty big difference. The other big firmware that could come to the R5 is lowering that overheating on the R5 and also changing up the different files. So that's stuff that could be added in the future, but if we're looking at things right now, that's where they both are, and that's the limitations that they both have. So now with those unknowns on the table, which one do I think is the better camera? Well, it's kind of hard to say which is better or worse because it's kind of apples to oranges here. But if you're a video-centric person, then probably check out the C70, and that may be the better option for you. Now, if you're a hybrid shooter, kind of more like myself, then the R5 is probably the better bet for you. But I will say, and what's kind of making me teeter back and forth between the two for myself, is that I do have the original R, and since I do have the original R, I can get good stills out of it, or at least good enough for what I do. So that's something to take into consideration if you already have a other mirrorless camera, maybe an Eos R or whatever other kind of mirrorless camera you have for stills, then maybe you just want to get a video-centric camera. if you don't mind carrying around 2 cameras. So where am I leaning right now? Well, what I may do is wait to see if the R1 is announced, which is going to be the follow-up flagship camera from Canon, and see what that has to offer. But if it comes just between these 2 cameras right now, I'm leaning more towards the R5 for myself because I am a hybrid shooter, and I think the video features will be enough for me and will be a huge step up from the original EOS R. And I also just like the mobility and not having to take 2 different cameras. But it really is a hard decision. It's a decision that I'm making for myself. But I hope this video gives you a little bit more information when it comes to making your purchase. And if you've liked this video, give it a like and consider subscribing. And if you would like to know more about the Sony a7S III versus the Canon R5, you can check out this video right here. But until next time, peace.